All right. Well, Otto, this is, or do you go by Jonathan or by Otto here?
Otto, but I'm not
Okay.
coming. We're
Uh,
I got
yes.
we're not
Well,
coming up on YouTube yet.
we're not
Here
on
we are.
YouTube yet.
We're it's transitioning. It's
Okay.
okay. We are
Okay.
now.
All right. Well, hello everyone. I'm here on Otto's show, and I guess we are live. Are we live right now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a live cast, but this is really me conducting an interview with Otto about his great new book, which is titled "The Years of Great Silence." And Otto, how long has it taken for you to write this book?
Well, I mean, I started it really writing it as a manuscript probably around 2011 when I first moved to Ghana, and then it got delayed because I was in Africa for a while and then I was in Iraq. But when I got back to the United States after my contract was not renewed in Kurdistan, and I was living with my parents under lockdown and COVID. I
Yeah,
spent a lot of time applying to jobs, and then all the jobs for academic positions on the planet, not just the U.S., dried up.
really.
And so my mother said, "I'm not going to kick you out, but since there's no more jobs to apply to, just finish that book. You have to do something."
Yeah,
And so, like, it was like a 6 month period, maybe a few months, maybe 5 month period, where I just like every night, like, just cranked it out the manuscript and edited it, and then it was really easy to find a publisher.
it was. So tell me how you found a publisher, because although this is interesting material, worthwhile material, historically relevant material, it's also not the sort of history that you often see covered in history books.
Okay, so my PhD was never published, although I sent it around to a few people. But one of the people I sent it to was actually a publisher of a in Great Britain that is not really academic. It's called Pluto Press, and it has a reputation for being pretty far left, like post-Trotskyite.
Mm,
But the guy who does the acquisitions, David Castle, is a real nice guy. I've had a number of dealings with him, even though he's never accepted anything I've written for publication. And so I sent him a query, and while he passed on it, he sent it to the English language acquisitions editor in London for a publisher of academic books in Germany. I believe the guy's name was Jakob Horst. And then I got an email from Jakob saying that he'd like to see it. And after they had seen it, they said they'd like to publish it.
and the rest is history. Now, when I last saw you, actually, the last time we met was in Lincoln, Nebraska, and you generously invited me along to uh, to a convention
Yes.
which was dedicated to the history of Germans living in the Soviet Union, or I guess just historically in Russia, but maybe especially the focus was especially on the time
Well,
during.
my talk was a lot of the talks from the Tsarist era from 1763 with the manifesto inviting Germans in all the way up to the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. So that's why it's called the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia, and that was actually their 50th anniversary jubilee meeting. So that was the big one.
It was pretty big. It was a festive event. It was also strange. I was like maybe the youngest person there, which was an odd feeling.
I think Eric, whom we had lunch with, I think he's like a year younger than you, maybe. I think he was born in 71, maybe the same age.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but it was good. It's it's too bad that there weren't any younger people there. It was kind of sad.
There were a few, but not many.
Yeah.
And this has been an issue with the organization for a long time. And basically, when you try and press that, they say, well, young people, they're busy working and have families, so they don't have any time for it. But there's not really also any outreach to try and recruit the younger generations either. The leadership is unfortunately following in Soviet the manner of being geriatric.
Interesting. Now, what inspired you to write this book in the first place?
I had an awful lot of material from Russian language sources in particular, especially a lot of archival sources, but also some oral sources. I conducted some interviews with old Russian Germans from when I was in Kyrgyzstan. So there's a town called Luxembourg, named after Rosa Luxemburg. That used to be an all-German settlement that's next to Kant, which is not named after Immanuel Kant. It's named after the Kyrgyz word for sugar cube.
It's just that's interesting.
But but because there's a lot of German minority there historically from the 19th century all the way up, especially from the 1920s onward, people thought it was named after Immanuel Kant. But there's also the town I went to, Ivanovka, which used to be Johannesdorf, which was at one time an all-German settlement. It's now mostly Kyrgyz and Dungan. The Dungans are Muslim Chinese who fled China into the Russian Empire, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan in the 19th century. But there's a few German settlements. Rotafana, Red Flag is still in Kyrgyzstan. So it was hard to do the interviews. I talk about it in the book because there's not too many people left, and almost all of them are women because the men died a lot faster because of the horrible conditions in the labor camps during the Second World War in the Urals. So we interviewed out of literally there was 8 attempted interviews. There were 10 scheduled. 2 died before I could get to them. Of the 8, one guy, he was in such bad shape we couldn't do the interview at all. It just wasn't. He couldn't speak. And then so there were 7, and of those 7, one was a man who was really interesting and good. He was a Crimean German. Spent 6 years in the labor camp in Bakalstroy in the Urals, doing industrial construction, and but Felix Littau. But the other 6 were all women, so a huge gender problem. But even now, because those were done, I did those in 2010. So I'm thinking probably even the women are probably now deceased since they were quite old even then.
Yeah. So it's just sort of like, well, the more typical example that Americans would be able to relate to is how, every year, there are fewer and fewer D-Day survivors. That's a historic day in America, and to the point now where I don't know, like.
Well, Andy, time marches on. We're now getting to the point where the Vietnam veterans are dying off. That's how advanced we are into the future.
That's right. That's right. We are definitely in some kind of future, for better or for worse. That's for sure.
I think all of the Korean War vets I knew are now dead.
Wow. So, were you? Yeah, and I don't think I put 2 and 2 together until I was actually attending this event with you, and I realized then, or you told me then, that this was actually your heritage. This is what you're descended from.
Yeah, my great grandfather Ludwig Pohl was born in Kortal, which was one of the early German settlements in northwestern Ukraine, but he came there late with the big wave that came from what was called Congress Poland. So outside of Lodz or Łódź, as the Poles call it, was a large German population. Prosiewicz is the town in Poland that my family was from. So after the 1863 uprising, a lot of land was confiscated from Polish nobles in Ukraine, and then the Tsarist government leased most of it out to Germans who came from Congress Poland, which it had taken after the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, into northwestern Ukraine or Volhynia. So my great-great-grandfather, Ferdinand, went from Poland, which was under Russian rule, into the Russian Empire proper in Ukraine. And my great-grandfather was born there, and they had a hutor, which is a farm separate from the village. So you have to commute to go to work from where you live. You don't work where you live like most villages do, or did in the Russian Empire. And after 1874, the Russian government revoked the immunity from conscription for ethnic Germans in the empire. So my great-grandfather, Ludwig, was conscripted during peacetime and spent 18 months in the Russian army, where he learned the Russian language, but he also did not like the Russian army. It was not a very pleasant experience. And so in 1905, when Russia went to war against Japan, and they mobilized the reserves, and they mobilized my great-grandfather, he says, "No, I don't think I'm going to go to Manchuria and die." And he left the Russian Empire and went to Germany and was working as a farmer in West Prussia for about a year, and then got on a boat to Hamburg and tried to get into the United States. And they wouldn't let him in. They said he was a person of bad moral character because he had gone AWOL in the Russian army.
Oh.
And so he went to Canada and then came into the U.S. In 1920.
They let him in Canada, though. They didn't. They were.
Well, you know,
more lax.
You know, draft dodging is a time-honored reason to get into Canada.
Right. That's funny. So, did you feel like these being your people, this being your heritage and your history, the history of your family, your extended family, did you feel that that not enough has been written, not enough has been acknowledged about this particular group, especially about the hardships that they endured during the time that you focus on, the period, I guess, beginning with the outbreak of World War II, going into the 50s, basically the Stalinist years. Was that your part of your motivation for?
Yeah, there's not a lot on it in English. The sources are predominantly Russian and German. There's, like said in the book, there's not a lot of interest in it outside of the ethnic group itself in the United States until people in Russia started writing about it using partial access to the Soviet archives from 87 onward. So
with the beginning,
there isn't anything like this in English. What?
That was sort of the beginning of the perestroika.
Yes. So perestroika's reconstruction and glasnost's openness under Gorbachev in the wake of the Chernobyl disaster. And you see the first academic journal article dealing with the deportation of the Volga Germans to Siberia and Kazakhstan in 1989 by N.F. Bugai of the Academy of Sciences in Istoria SSSR, which is their official academic journal. It's now been changed to Otchetsvenaya Istoria, which means fatherland history rather than the history of the USSR, but basically the same journal, just new ideology.
Yes. clearly, just a rebranding. Now, what were some of the early? I'm just sort of curious to know, when going back before the time of persecution that you really focused on. What was the experience of the German, the people of German ethnicity living in Russia? I mean, they were able to retain their own communities. It sounded like doesn't sound like there was a lot of interbreeding with the
No,
Russians.
that really only comes after the deportations in 1941. So they were given a special status from 63, and then get revoked for a while under Catherine the Great, but her son Paul I then restores it. So from all the way up until about 1871, they have the status as special colonists, which they have special privileges not granted to the majority of Russian subjects. And then these are revoked, and they are legally given the same status as the serfs that were emancipated by Alexander II in 1861. But they're still living in the basically isolated German language villages that are not only isolated from their Russian and Ukrainian neighbors for the most part, in some cases Georgian and Azeri as well, or even in Kazakh or Kyrgyz, but isolated from other Germans because they divided themselves along religion. So Lutheran villages did not associate with Catholic villages.
I see. And they were granted this kind of status just because was it because they were industrious and provided things for the state that
they're invited in. So Catherine II herself is German.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, although her primary language was French, and to become the consort of Peter III, she has to convert to the Russian Orthodox Church. But she herself was born in Germany, and was ethnically German. So she thought that Russia needed to, following along the lines of Peter I, right, Peter the Great, needed to import ideas and technology, and also, in this case, people from the West. So the 1762, she issues a kind of a vague manifesto in December to invite Christian foreigners to come to the Russian Empire to farm and to do also kind of become a human barrier between the central parts of Russia and the nomadic steppe peoples, the Kazakhs, the Bashkirs, the Kalmucks. Right. This doesn't again. So in 22nd July 1763, there's a really detailed manifesto that gives free land, freedom of religion, and this is right after the 7-Year War, and not all that far after the 30-Year War. So there's a big push factor out of Germany as well, or what will become Germany. Freedom from taxation for up to 30 years, depending on where you settled, and freedom from conscription forever. So there was a lot of incentive to come over, and the Russian government sent agents with this document to go and try and entice people. So we go through the various German states like Hesse and say, look, if you come over to the Volga, we'll give you some free land. You know, you won't be persecuted for your religion. You won't have taxes for a while. You'll have some access to state loans without any interest. Right? And so there's this whole list of goodies, and about 20,000 people said, that sounds better than what we've got now. Let's get on the boat.
And it's interesting because it's sort of like, of course, a term that became popular in Germany later was Lebensraum. And this is almost like an earlier, I mean, under very different circumstances, but this is like an earlier manifestation of Lebensraum, isn't it? Like,
Well,
there's
there's always going even further back. There is the Drang nach Osten, but this is yes, this is kind of different from the push by the Teutonic Knights and the Livonian Knights and others eastward. In that this was the head of the Russian government inviting people in, but this had also been done earlier by the governments in Poland and Bohemia and Hungary to
right.
invite in foreigners from German-speaking lands. So
Hmm.
this wasn't a new idea. It's been around from the Middle Ages, but in the late 18th century, it gets applied in a big way to first the Volga, and then in the early 19th century to what is now Ukraine in the Black Sea region and Crimea.
So people saw Germans as an asset, it sounds like.
Yeah, so they were thought of as good farmers. They were thought of as people that would, not rock the boat against the existing regime. That would be hardworking. That would. Did I lose you, Andy?
For a moment, sorry, my internet's a little
Oh, it's
wonky
okay.
right
You're back, but without a face.
now. Oh, you can hear me though?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Well, I can see my face over here. I don't know what's going. I apologize.
That's okay. So yeah, the German settlers were viewed as being a beneficial colonists to develop undeveloped areas of the Russian Empire, but also to, as I said, become a human barrier in the initial settlements in the Volga between the European population and Asian nomads, which were engaged in marauding and taking people as slaves to be sold in Bukhara and Khiva in what is now Uzbekistan. And as I noted in the book, there's 3 villages that are destroyed early on that the Germans set up in the Volga by the Kazakhs. Andy? Are you there? Oh no, I've lost him. Let me see what we got here. Andy, you there? Oh no. All right, let's add this guy and remove this guy. You there, Andy?
I'm here. Sorry about that.
All right, we had like several Andys. It's been like you've been like reproducing yourself asexually, like the Sorcerer's Apprentice with the brooms.
Yeah, I know. I'm remaking myself. I'm going to move to a part of the house that might be closer to the modem. I don't know if that's going to help or not. Hopefully it will. This is such a professional operation I've got here. So the last thing I was saying was that generally speaking, going through the years and the decades and the centuries, that it sounds like for the most part, the Germans lived in peace with their Russian rulers, and that the Russians wanted them there because they saw them as an asset, and they were an asset. Did that change at all with the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and the beginning?
Yeah, it changes really, as I said, 1871, and in 1871 you have the unification of Germany under Otto von Bismarck as Chancellor, and so you now have a unified,
Yes.
powerful German state, and the Russian government starts to strip all the privileges away from the Russian colonists in the Russian Empire because they viewed that they might be a Trojan horse.
Oh, so the Germans stopped being so nice to the Russians who were living in Germany.
No, it was that there is no Germany until
Right.
as a political entity until 1871. After there becomes one, then the Russian government becomes fearful that it will become a threat because we now has the ability, the power, the political unity And so it takes precautions as part
Right.
of its kind of policies internally to
Yes.
make sure that the large German population in the Russian Empire cannot be used against them.
Yes. That makes so it was the unification of Germany under Otto von Bismarck that really marked a turning point.
Yes.
And then they're probably like I'm guessing that the overall situation probably wasn't helped by the events of 1917 and the Civil War which followed that.
No, there was a lot of Bolshevik terror against the Germans, as well as some others. The anarchists under Makhno, particularly the whole series of massacres with incredibly brutal rapes against the Mennonite communities in eastern Ukraine in 1919. But because they, particularly in the Ukraine, they were very wealthy, very successful farmers. They were targets for the Bolsheviks and other socialist forces to just basically pillage and take food and horses and whatever else they needed from. And the Germans didn't particularly like this. But they weren't real thrilled with the white forces because before the Bolsheviks took power, you had the provisional government. And the
And the
provisional
white forces
government.
the white forces, just to clarify for people out there, were the czarist, the pro-czarist forces who were fighting.
Denikin and Wrangel, particularly in the south of Russia and Ukraine and Crimea. Wrangel himself, Baltic German from Estonia, but as I say in the book, people with very different social origins than the German colonists in the Black Sea and Volga regions. But the Tsarist government had begun the deportation of ethnic Germans eastward already in World War I. So in 1915 and 1916, they deported about 200,000 from Volhynia and Poland and Bessarabia. And they were prepared to deport all of them. Supposedly, it was scheduled for March of 1917. They were going to deport the Volga Germans into Siberia, but the February 1917, the government is overthrown, and provisional government, for most of its existence, is run not very well by Alexander Kerensky.
Right. And is this around the time when the Germans actually sent Vladimir Lenin to Russia?
They sent him, yeah. Yes, this is when they sent Lenin to on a sealed train from Switzerland up to Finland, and then into St. Petersburg, which was then later named Leningrad after Lenin. But yeah, but the Bolsheviks don't take power until November. So our calendar, 2nd of November, 1917.
Yes, I just think that's wild that they're supposed to be so fearful of communism, but they send this notorious communist to Russia. Just with the idea of getting the Russians out of the war, right, causing chaos in Russia, so that they.
Yes.
But not maybe a certain lack of foresight there,
particularly Marx, but also Engels, and I would say most of the German socialists, particularly the hard left, quote unquote scientific communists, didn't think that Russia was going to be ready for any type of socialism for a long time. That it was too backwards.
Right.
It hadn't developed enough capitalism.
That's true. It was supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen in the more industrialized countries first.
Right. So Germany, Great
yet.
Britain, these were the places that were supposed to be a successful communist revolution. So I guess the Germans were thinking, if we remove him from the environment of Switzerland, he'll be able to do less damage, because there's no way to get socialism in a backward agrarian place like Russia, or at least the way it was perceived by many German intellectuals, not only on the right, but certainly on the left. including
Yes.
Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels themselves.
Yes, absolutely. So things probably got a little. Well, you were saying there were uh, uh, attacks, of massacres of various kinds that happened, mostly by the communists and anarchists, people on the left, but also the German communities didn't really trust the czarist, the so-called whites in the Civil War either, and so. Uh, After the Civil War finally was over, the Bolsheviks consolidated their rule. Um, what were things like for Germany from that point up until the beginning of World War II?
Well, it goes through several phases, but initially, because the Bolsheviks almost lose, they make a lot of concessions. So economically, there's a new economic policy from 1921 to 1928. But there's also, and it gets the official enunciation as a Soviet Union-wide policy. And the Soviet Union comes about in December of 1922 with the first Soviet Constitution and the Union Treaty. The policy of Korenizatsiya, or indigenization, which Germans in the Soviet Union benefit from, but they'd already earlier benefited from. So the Volga German Workers' Commune was the first ethno-state in the Soviet Union, the ethnic republic,
Oh, really?
founded by Lenin himself on 19th of October 1918.
I see. So Lenin sort of thought the Germans might have a role to play in bringing the communist revolution to
Yeah, there were two things they
Russia.
thought. One, for all the nationalities that they bring in the Soviet Union, they were going to have to bring communism to them in their own language and culture. That they couldn't appear to be a red form of a Russian empire. Otherwise, people
Right.
would just reject it.
Right.
And two, the Germans were looked at as a particularly important group because they wanted to bring them as models to inspire communist revolution in Germany and Austria.
Hmm. And then after 1933, when the National Socialists take over in Germany, initially, as I recall, there was some sort of well, I mean, at some point along the way, I know there was the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact.
39, August 2039.
Yeah, and that was a bit later, but it seemed like I remembered reading some things anyway that sort of suggested that that they were, even though they were supposedly ideologically the opposite of one another, that there was perhaps a sort of agreement by those on each side that
there were earlier agreements that were supported by members that were nationalists, but not national socialists in the Reichswehr, what was allowed to remain the military in Weimar Germany, between the Soviet government and the Weimar government, particularly General von Seeckt. So there was openly there's the Rapallo Treaty, but there was secret agreements to allow the German, particularly Air Force, which was banned, and also Navy, things like submarines, to practice and train in the Soviet Union. But this is before Hitler is appointed chancellor in 1933. This is still in the 1920s.
I see. Okay. But in any case, it's not quite clear that Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia are going to be enemies, particularly in 1939 with the signing of the Non-Aggression Pact. And it's my understanding, again, I'm just an armchair historian. I just know bits and pieces of things that I've read here and there, but it's my understanding that Operation Barbarossa just took Stalin completely by surprise. That he was
Well, yeah,
he
well, you're
thought.
skipping up to 1941, but yes, but
Yes.
there's a lot of oscillation. But with regards to the period of time, so you have this period of time from 1921 to 1928, where there's liberalization in economic policies as well as a promotion of all non-Russians, including the Germans. But then Stalin politically consolidates his power. By 27, he's removed Kamenev, Zinoviev, Trotsky, all the
Right.
old members of the Politburo. And 28, he's consolidated his power. In 1930, he appoints Kaganovich as his a left-hand man, if we think of Molotov as his right-hand man. And then he begins collectivization, the 5-year plan. And this is where you start to see things go really bad for lots of the nationalities in the Soviet Union, including the Germans. So at this point, we start to see that during collectivization, we not only have the disproportionate attack on Germans as kulaks because they are wealthy and they had done
Yeah.
quite well in the 20s under the new economic policy.
I was
But
going to
now
ask you that about the
being openly
kulak thing.
associated with ethnicity. And so in 1929, we have the first Soviet decree that mentions attacking a group on the basis of their ethnicity, and it is the exile internally in the Soviet Union of ethnic German kulaks from Nikolaev Okrug in Ukraine.
Mm. And kulak is just one. It's like
It's the Russian word for fist, but it means like to squeeze somebody like a fist. So an exploiter, a rich peasant that hires labor and loans money at interest.
It was a very elastic word. It was sort of a. It was a
In
word
practice,
that was used.
yes.
It was used to scapegoat various people who were just people who were better off, and to sort of flog.
Yeah, well, I mean, it basically, it became to mean anything the Soviet government wanted to. They even had the term kulak henchmen and sub-kulak, which were these applied to people that were obviously too poor. I mean, people who owned nothing, but because they were ideologically opposed to collectivization, they were branded as kulaks and rounded up and sent to special settlements in the Arctic Circle or the Urals.
Right. So things are kind of bad for the Russian Germans in the 30s. They're targeted more often.
They're quite bad in the period of time 30-31 during dekulakization, and they're quite bad during the Holodomor at 32-33. There's famine not only in Ukraine, but the Volga, and also in Kazakhstan, where there are a lot of Germans. And it's quite bad during the Great Terror. There's an actual German operation targeting German diaspora. So of the 46,000 ethnic Germans, about 5% of the population that are shot in the Soviet Union, 37-38, over 29,000 of those are shot in the German operation. They're being deliberately targeted and killed because they are German. And this is where we start to see perhaps where I think Nolte falls down on his interpretation of and not noting the factor of revenge for Soviet atrocities against ethnic Germans. Most of these killings, 18,005, are in Ukraine. And the head of the NKVD in Ukraine is Israel Leplevsky, who was a former Bundist before he became a Bolshevik. And his number 2 man is Lev Reichman. The head of the Gulag at this time is Matvey Berman. So we see a lot of powerful Jews, including one who was a Jewish nationalist, who was heading the secret police in Ukraine, shooting tens of thousands of ethnic Germans because they are ethnic Germans. And this is in 37 and 38, long before the German invasion of the Soviet Union, and much longer before the first gassings at Chelmno on 8th of December, 1941.
Right. So that provides some context for German attitudes towards that towards the ethnicity to which you're referring.
Yes.
You know,
Well, I think it's a better explanation that oh no, they just were completely irrational and were hating these people for no reason. I mean, it might not
yeah,
be a good reason to scapegoat an entire ethno-racial group because of some members of it, but at least it's a reason as opposed to, well, it just they had no reason whatsoever.
sure, absolutely. And these are the little details that they're not little details. They're big details, but they get left out of most of our history classes. So your book, the subtitle is "The Years of Great."
Long.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The title is "The Years of Great Silence," and the subtitle is 1941 or something.
The
Uh,
deportation, special settlement, and mobilization into the labor army of ethnic Germans in the USSR in 1941 to 1955.
right. I remember the dates, 1941 through 1955. So in 1941, of course, that's when Russia and Germany, in spite of the special relationship that they had enjoyed for the couple of years prior to that, Hitler puts an end to that with Operation Barbarossa, and then things change radically for the worse for Germans in living within Russia's borders. So, what's uh, what's the best way to summarize those years?
Well, very bad, but I mean, basically, starting in August 1941, Soviets basically systematically round up all of the ethnic Germans, about 1 million, living west of the Urals in the Soviet Union, under the control, and deport them eastward into Kazakhstan and Siberia without very much as far as food and housing and
Mhm.
other material necessities. And then they mobilize them for forced labor in labor camps, particularly in the Urals, and how the conditions get even worse. So we have a rather large number of them dying prematurely, particularly from malnutrition. We
Yeah.
have the population spread out and dispersed across Siberia and northern Kazakhstan. You have the traditional villages and communities totally destroyed by this uprooting. So not a good time for them, and maybe for the present day, the most insulting thing is that there was a veil of silence. That's why it's called Diara des Grosses Schweigen,
Mhm.
imposed that they couldn't say anything about it for decades.
Yeah. Yeah. Hence the title of your book. Um, Now, is there an estimate as to how many deaths resulted of these campaigns?
Yeah,
Uh,
well, which one? You want like a total figure from 1918 to 1953, just the 41 to 55 figure?
well, yeah, I was wondering about 41 to 55.
About
Just
245,000
yeah.
premature deaths is what I've calculated. I have a whole
Mm,
chapter on it. It's not very
mhm,
long chapter, but I
yeah,
go over all the number crunching.
mhm. Um, and it's kind of strange to think about that this was happening during the war years, because you would think that since when Russia was being actually invaded, and that albeit by the Germans, so I guess they would have reason to be suspicious of Germans living in their own borders, rightly or wrongly. But you would think that they wouldn't be. You would think that they would have to throw everything at the war effort, and they wouldn't have a whole lot of resources left over to herd all of these poor ethnic Germans, to their deaths or to their utter destitution, up in Siberia. I mean, how did that
They
work?
well, they diverted a huge amount of resources, particularly a rail stock, to engage in these internal deportations, not just of Germans, but in Finns, and then in 43, 44, a whole bunch of people from other regions of the Soviet Union, the Chechens in the North Caucasus, the Crimean Tatars from Crimea, the Kalmucks from the Kalmuk steppe. So yes, you had diversion of military resources to engage in ethnic cleansing and genocide. But this is not unusual. I mean, we saw the Tsarist government do this with ethnic Germans in World War I on the front in Volhynia and in Congress, Poland, and Bessarabia. It was a major undertaking by the Ottoman government against the Armenians in World War I. So this is
Right.
not unusual. Even in the United States, there is a roundup and transfer away from the coast and the border with Mexico of
The Japanese.
Japanese and Japanese Americans, so the first and
Yeah.
second generations.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Now, were there any Germans who actually who escaped these deportations and these persecutions, and who fought for Russia against Nazi
Yeah,
Germany?
there were some. So initially, the deportations occur starting August 15th from Crimea and from the Volga, 3rd of September, and the rest are later in September and in October. But the officially ethnic Germans are not removed from the Soviet Red Army until the 8th of September, 1941. So from the 22nd of June until 8th of September, there are about 33,000 Volga Germans fighting in the Red Army. And there is one particular battle in which they kind of do a Alamo defense, where they basically all die fighting against the Wehrmacht at Brest.
And they're thought of afterwards as martyrs for the cause. Just sort of.
Well, no, they kind of just buried it. Well, I mean, for a while, I mean, initially, and then when they deported the Volga Germans, yeah, it just got buried that these people ever existed. But there were some who managed to change their nationality through illegal means and cooperation with superior officers and keep fighting in the Red Army. There were some who managed to fight in NKVD partisan units against the Germans behind the lines, doing the same thing. But there's not a lot of them. But before the removal from the Red Army and being sent to labor camps in the Urals in September of 1941, there was this period in late June, July, and August where they were actively fighting. And they do put up a heroic defense on the Soviet behalf at Brest against the Wehrmacht.
Well, it's one of those things that, again, I'm just an amateur amateur armchair historian, but it's something that I've noticed.
But you are an honorable German from Russia, because we made you one in Lincoln.
I know, that's true. That's true. But it's something that I have noticed with, particularly in the Stalin years, that there would be this, even during wartime, they would set resources aside to persecute people on their own side. Whereas you think it would that it would be in their interest to say, okay, it's a war now, we're all together.
Yeah, as I point out, I don't think that's that unusual.
Okay.
The Ottomans spent an awful lot of resources killing Armenians during the middle of a war, which ended up with them being destroyed.
Yeah. I was also thinking about the Spanish Civil War, which was basically, as I understand it, it was basically lost because the Stalinists were just more interested in purging people on their own side than they were about fighting Franco's
Well, I mean, there is
fascists.
this strategy of the communist, which in the long run I think did them well in the 20th century. That is, to make sure that when the main enemy was gone, that there was no other possible opposition.
Right.
So you see this.
Even at the expense of losing. I mean, they
Well,
end
they
up
lost in
losing
Spain,
Spain.
but usually they won. So, like you look at like Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh had all of the other Vietnamese nationalists, the Cao Dai and the Ho Ho and
Uh-huh.
the anarchist and the Trotskyites. He had all those people killed as a greater priority than throwing the French out. Make sure that when the French were gone, only the communists under him were around.
So this is more of a communist proclivity than a Stalinist proclivity. Per
Well, I
se.
mean, communism is a successful form was Stalinist. I mean,
Right.
North Vietnam, China under Mao, these are all basically the Stalin model.
Mm-hmm. Right. So after the war, the persecutions continued.
Yes.
Now,
In fact,
why
it
was
got
that?
worse
Why were
because
they still?
the Germans that had been in the East already, they had been
Mhm.
subject to conscription and forced labor in the labor army, but they weren't put under special settlement restrictions until after the end of the war. So you had 100,000 ethnic Germans who were descendant of Germans that started going to Central Asia in 1882 and in Siberia in 1907. And these people are now placed under special settlement restrictions even in September, starting in September of 1945. And Germany was defeated in May of 1945.
Yeah. Yeah. So they still, like I was saying, I one would think one would suspect that after the war is over, that they might just sort of get a little more mellow in their attitude towards the Germans within their borders, but that wasn't particularly the case.
No, in fact, and in the repression, as far as the special settlement restriction gets worse in 45, near the end of the war in January, and then again in 48. They decree that the deportation, the exile, is for all eternity, that for all future generations, and that anybody trying to leave and return to their homeland in the Volga or Ukraine will be sent to a labor camp for 20 years, and any free citizen assisting them will get 5 years imprisonment. So it's only after Stalin dies, and he dies
Yeah.
on Death of Stalin Day, 5th of March, 1953. It's a major holiday.
Yeah.
Free borscht for everybody.
Yeah.
That thing get better. So really, the first like liberalization is in 1954, which is almost 10 years after the war is over.
Mm-hmm. And it was only then that the persecution really came to an end, more or less.
Well, they start to get less. I mean, a good argument made that they don't ever come to an end in the Soviet Union. It's only when the Soviet Union collapses
Mm-hmm.
and you have the ability for mass emigration to Germany out of the former Soviet states.
Right.
That end, but even then, there's still discrimination in some of the post-Soviet states against Germans. It's not so bad in Russia itself, where there's still a large number of them, about 400,000 in Western Siberia. And things have gotten better in Kazakhstan with about 178,000. But almost all of them had to leave Tajikistan because of the Islamist. Kyrgyzstan, there's only about 8,000 left. There used to be over 100,000.
And did the rest go elsewhere, or did they die? or
No, they
or
went to.
both?
Well, there was a huge emigration from 1987 to 2005, really, of Germans, but it reached to Germany from the former Soviet Union. So it reached its height in 93, 94. There were 200,000 ethnic Germans leaving the former Soviet Union, particularly Kazakhstan, which went from over 1 million Germans to now it's less than 200,000.
Mm. And what I kind of feel like with world events being what they are right now, with the tensions continually building.
Yeah, I
With,
got banned from Twitter for a week for saying nuclear war against Russia was a bad idea.
really,
Yeah.
they they banned you for being against nuclear war.
Well, what I said was implying that if you want to kill everybody, it'd be better if you just kill yourself. So I said, if you support nuclear war against Russia, you should just commit suicide. And if you support nuclear war against Russia on behalf of the ideology of Yaroslav Stetsko and Stepan Bandera, then who organized the Lviv pogrom in '41, then you should do it by castration. And they claimed this was advocating a hateful conduct and behavior.
Social media is just so gay. I hate it. I just hate them all. But I feel like I want to, in some ways, decouple, what's going on right now from what is discussed in your book. I mean, not totally, because there's always history is continuous and there's always a linkage to the past. But there has been this effort I've found in the West over the course of especially the last 10 years and really especially in the last 5 years to villainize the current state of Russia, which is not the Soviet Union. It's not perfect. It's not heaven on earth by any stretch.
It's pretty nice, though. I was in Moscow in 2019, and it looks a hell of a lot better than Washington, D.C.
Really, that's interesting. So anyway, I suspect, like you, I am very alienated from those beating the war drums, for this proxy war in Ukraine, and just the insanity that seems to be going on right now, and how
if you're in Ukraine being called to war, it's bad idea. So you should do like my great grandfather and just freaking go AWOL.
That's right.
My great grandfather, in many ways, was a person of bad moral character, but his going AWOL from the Russian army was the best thing he ever did, because none of us would exist in my family if he hadn't.
That's right. So, is there anything that you want to say about the current state of things as relates to what you write about in your book?
Well, I mean, one thing I've noticed, I talked about, there's like with their children, there's now like 2.5 million Germans from Russia in Germany, and a lot of them still speak Russian and have ties with relatives still in Siberia, the 400,000. Keep some Russian ways, which they've adopted. A lot of them have come under kind of renewed discrimination and persecution in Germany because of their continued ties with Russia, to the point where in Berlin, stores run by Germans from Russia who were carrying Russian consumer products were being attacked and vandalized and boycotted.
Wow. Talk about historical echoes, right? Oh my gosh.
No,
it's hard not to think of Kristallnacht, is it?
Oh, I mean, that is one of the things is for the Aussiedler and Spade Aussiedler, that is those who left the Soviet Union or the Russian Federation or Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan and went to Germany. The saying is that in Russia we were always treated as Germans, and in Germany we are now treated as Russians.
Huh. Yeah, pretty sad. So, where do you, as the historian, where do you think? And of course, this is not the main topic. We're talking about your book, and I'm wanting to help expose, get news of your
That's
book
okay
out there.
because the book isn't going to sell anything if we all die in a nuclear war. So
That's true.
it
That's
becomes
true.
irrelevant.
That's true. So we should try to stop the nuclear war, and then we
But
can.
you remember the 80s, right? There was general agreement nuclear war was a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
if
yeah.
you were a guy that was advocating it, you would be thought of as some sort of crazy nut that, no, I mean, even as much as he's maligned, right? Nixon did think that the center of U.S. relations with the Soviet Union should be to prevent nuclear war.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Reagan and Gorbachev eventually, got together and worked something out, even though it was, it took a little while. So yeah, absolutely. No
Bad
nuclear war.
for plants, animals, children, and other living things.
Yes, indeed. But I guess what are your thoughts on where do you see things going right now? Besides, if you think we're all gonna die.
Well, I
Really want
don't,
to hear that.
but I actually don't think that. But the fact that people are
Okay.
advocating it just
Yeah.
is because it shows how much the Overton window has moved. Things that were beyond the pale, right?
Yeah.
Even you used to have movies, even in the early '60s, Doctor Strangelove, right?
Yes.
Which was an attack. Not on the idea of using nuclear weapons so much, but the very idea that we had them around and that they had been invented by people like Edward Teller and who's I guess the model for Doctor Strangelove himself.
Right. Yeah. Who'd been who was a German asset, right? It was.
Teller was Hungarian, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, he wasn't part of Operation Paperclip. I just wondered.
He might have been, but he was from Hungary.
Okay, because Peter Sellers' whole joke is like he tries to stop himself from doing the Nazi salute.
Well, I mean, I think there's other people other than Teller involved in that. So Werner von Braun probably too as well.
Right.
Although Werner von Braun was with the rocket program, not the
Right.
nuclear program.
Right. Which reminds me, can Elon Musk save us all? Do you think? You hear how he's got this plan for peace?
No.
He's trying to broker a deal. I don't know much about it. I just read about it recently somewhere, and he came under fire for saying that in the western part of Ukraine there are actually a lot of people who consider themselves Russian and want to be part of Russia.
You mean the eastern part of Ukraine?
The eastern part of Ukraine, that's what I meant.
Yeah, near Zaporozhye and Donetsk and Lugansk.
Right. So anyway, so when are cooler heads going to prevail, Mr. Historian? Tell us when is that going to happen? What's going to take us back from the brink?
I don't know. Again, I think the last time we spoke, I think I was in Kyrgyzstan again. It's hard to predict because the whole world kind of went crazy after I came back to the United States.
Yes.
I don't know. So if you had told me they force everybody to have vaccines and wear masks on pain of being fired and this type of stuff, I would have thought, no, that's too crazy even for
that's
the
a
wild science
dystopian
fiction. Yeah,
that's
even
a
the Philip K.
dystopian
Dick
science
stuff.
fiction movie.
Yeah, that's crazy Nowicki fiction stuff. But now, of course, now that we've lived through it, I don't know, but
Yeah.
it does it does boggle my mind that we're, in terms of not just absolute amounts of resources, but in percentage terms, because we're much bigger now, throwing and wasting more money per month in Ukraine than we did during the height of the Vietnam War on South Vietnam. And of
Every
course,
time I hear, Congress approved a $30 billion package for Ukraine, and not humanitarian aid for Ukraine. I would that would be a little bit more, I would say, oh well, yeah, there's probably a lot of people
how
who
about
need.
$30 billion of humanitarian aid for New Mexico?
Yeah, yeah. Or for Florida, there was like the Babylon Bee had a story about a city in Florida after the hurricane, how they raised the Ukrainian flag so that the U.S. government would give them aid. It was pretty
That's
funny.
the Mouse that Roared, another Peter Sellers movie. Do you ever see that?
No, I haven't seen that
Okay,
one.
so there's a little tiny duchy like Luxembourg or Liechtenstein in Europe, right? And they're bankrupt. They have no more money. They've spent the last piece of gold in their treasury. And so they look around and say, look at Germany. They were totally destroyed during the war, and then the Americans gave them all this money to rebuild. So what we need to do is declare war on America, lose, and get reconstruction aid. So they go and declare war on the U.S. and they have these Viking longboats that row into New York, and they accidentally come and they capture the Q bomb, which is the super successor to the A bomb. They don't know what they have. So the United States surrenders to them and they win the war, which means there's no reconstruction aid. So now they're screwed having won the war. And then
So
Peter Sellers pays all the characters. He dressed even the women characters he played.
It's pretty funny. Well, that's about it. Well, so your book again is the years of great silence by Otto. Remind me your last name again. Pole. That's right. The pole position. Otto Pole. Dr. Otto Pole. Are you getting some good press for it? Are people reading it and appreciating it?
I got one good review that it's up there on Amazon and also on another site with the same review by Randy Sanford. I got an interesting email from I don't know if he's in Germany or if he's in Iran, but he was from his parents were deported from the German community in Azerbaijan into Central Asia. And it looks like when they did the exchange, letting out Polish citizens into Iran in 1941, that somehow his parents managed to forge documents claiming to be Polish citizens rather than Soviet Germans and got out through that way.
Oh, wow. Okay. Pretty interesting.
But he has a Persianized name, so I'm guessing that he was in Iran for some time, if he's not still there now. But he said he had read my book and liked it a lot.
Well, that's great. So is there since this is a live cast, is there anybody out there with serious questions who's been watching, or?
I don't know. Put them in the chat. Let's see if there's any. I'm going to go up here. And there's been a running debate here that I haven't been paying attention to because I've been talking to you. But let's see. Okay, question. Why didn't Pol tweet this out? Because Pol is in Twitter gulag for opposing nuclear war.
That's a pretty good reason to be. I mean, I think if you're going to get kicked off of Twitter for something, that's a pretty damn good reason.
I know. I mean,
no shame there.
I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not. I mean, I deleted the tweet just so I get back in a week, but I'm not like. I don't think that I look. these people want to kill all 7 billion of us. Better than they just kill themselves, and then we don't have to worry about it, because this is literally the land of insanity. And it's not because I value my own particular life that much at 52, but I have children, and these people don't seem to care about anything in the future themselves.
Absolutely. Is Claire Caw still out there, or is she not among us?
I have been ignoring her. She's talking about insanity. I did notice that you were intervening on behalf of Colin Liddell to get him removed from the ADL naughty list.
Yes. Yes. Yes, indeed. I mean,
is he gone full mainstream?
Well, sort of.
Okay, here's a legitimate question. What's my latest job? I've gone over this in the last couple of live streams, but I'm a grocery cashier, front checkout.
Oh, okay. You're the common man.
In some senses, yes, but I tell you what, I'm on the front lines of people when they realize just how horrible the Biden administration is, because they go up and they buy for $200 the amount of groceries they would have gotten for $50 a year ago.
Oh boy. Yeah. It's pretty grim right now. No question. Well, unless there are other questions on the chat, I didn't want to ignore the chat, but you'll be able to send this a copy of this to me, because I want to be able to post this on my own.
Well, it's going to be up, I suppose. Not sure how I would send it. I mean,
okay, I'll just link to it. I'll just.
But I will see if I'll ask somebody. But
okay.
I'm not going to delete it or take it down. So.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Well, Otto, it's good to talk to you. It's been a little while.
Here's a question. Failures of the Soviet populist or ethnic Germans we can learn from. There's quite a few. I think the main thing, and particularly, I had this discussion with Vladimir Brovkin, who's an expert on the Russian Civil War. He himself is not ethnically German. He's 3/4 Russian and 1/4 Jewish, but generally supportive of the Russian white position, particularly Denikin. Is that the average Russian peasant was completely unprepared. They were completely unaware. I mean, if you read some of the literature by the Germans, particularly the Mennonites, who were very much into using biblical analogies to describe things, and they literally thought it was the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That what the Bolsheviks, the Cheka, was bringing was something that was right out of Satan's Inferno.
Right.
So I mean, you see kind of that they're totally unprepared. This is something that they did not organize for. And then when they finally did, they have the Green Uprising, the peasant revolts against the Bolsheviks. They were unable to think beyond their own very limited regional interest. So there was no way to really unify the opposition. So you have lots of you had widespread opposition, but it could only pull itself together on a regional level.
I gotcha. Understood.
And of course, the Germans were split not only geographically but by confession. And so during the Civil War,
which was a bigger deal back then to be split by confession.
Very big deal. Americans of Russian German descent considered it to be a huge deal as late as the 1970s if somebody who was from a Catholic village in the Russian Empire and somebody from a Lutheran village in the Russian Empire married each other.
Mm, there you go.
That was considered to be as big a deal as like marrying, somebody of a different color almost.
Right.
But now those distinctions are largely gone. So I mean,
Mhm.
but they lasted for quite some time, even in the secondary diaspora.
Mhm. Now I forget what your confession is, if any. Are you
I
Catholic?
am
Are
a
you Orthodox?
Presbyterian, but it is not because of my German from Russia heritage. It's just actually from my mother's side of the family. But
Oh,
I was born again when I was in Ghana and became baptized and joined the Presbyterian
oh,
Church of Ghana. So I'm
interesting.
actually spiritually black.
Interesting. That's very
No,
interesting.
I'm not spiritually black. There is no
That,
Greek. There
but
is no Jew. Corinthians.
yes, but you were baptized. You were
I was
baptized
baptized
and
by Brother
converted.
Daniel, who was a Ghanaian. He
Yeah.
pastor. Yes, and there was
You
like two
you.
white people in my congregation. So like if we like missed church, even though the huge congregation, they would know. And one time I had to miss because of work. I had to give a final exam. And I come back from the university, and there's people from my church knocking on my door. Dr. Pohl, are you okay? You didn't show up to church today. We're worried that you're sick.
Wow. Keeping tabs on you, huh? That's funny.
Uh, Actually, yeah, because the government in Ghana is so dysfunctional. Community organizations, particularly religious ones, churches, have to fill in the gaps. So yeah,
Oh, fascinating. You've been quite the jet setter. You've gone. I mean, you're like a regular James Bond. You've gone from Kyrgyzstan to Ghana to Iraq to uh, and then eventually back to California and
yeah, I'm in
and
New
now
Mexico now.
now to New Mexico. You're a well-traveled man.
I gotta tell you, I like New Mexico a lot more than California.
Yeah, I imagine so. California sucks right now. It really does. I would not
Occasionally
want
we get people that they had been in New Mexico and then they went to California. They come back to New Mexico, and I said,
to.
"How'd you like it?" And they said it was okay at first, but then it became really bad, and we had to return.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, it's we've been talking for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. So
Okay,
it's time
thanks a
to
lot
wrap
for
it up.
coming on.
Yeah, and I will do my best to promote your book. I know that a lot of people out there will be very interested. I mean, in the subject matter because this is this is a part of history we just don't hear about. We don't hear about the persecution of Germans. Uh,
Depends where you live. I mean, if you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, you're going to hear about it.
yeah, maybe you're right. You're right. In
There's
your
also,
individual communities.
yeah. So like Cincinnati has a huge German from Yugoslavia population, down
Okay.
Schwaben. But yeah, it's not in Savannah, Georgia,
Well, and yeah, and I just what I meant is
and not in southeastern New Mexico.
yeah, and what I meant was we're not going to hear about it from the mainstream media or from you
Oh no,
know
no, no. I was talking about from diaspora communities, people that
right
related
right
to
the
the
word of mouth
population.
sort of thing. Yeah, exactly.
But there are a lot more in the U.S. than you would think. There's 1 million Americans of German from Russia ancestry.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe next time when we talk, we can talk about Rick Springfield and
I love Rick Springfield. People were down on him because they thought he used his television career to kind of give him a
uh-huh.
popularity that he didn't deserve. But I think his music I mean, it's pop music. It's he's not Beethoven or Brahms or Bach, but
He was very
it still
talented.
holds up. It's 40 years now, and I still like the
Yeah,
song.
he was a talent. He's a talented musician.
I think that
He was
whole
a
album, Working
he was
Class
a good
Dog, is good.
he was a good looking guy. He was a soap opera actor, and so
Right, and that's what kind of people thought that he was like, playing that on
yeah. But
to
he's
make
actually
up.
but
But
he's actually a
he
great
had good guitar licks. He had good lyrics, a catchy
yeah.
voice.
Absolutely, absolutely. No
I
argument
mean,
here.
he had two good albums, which is a lot better than most people.
Yeah,
It's kind of like the argument you used to get about Brad Pitt because he was in his younger days really good looking,
right.
but in his older days he's a really good actor, and there aren't too
Hmm.
many left.
Yeah,
Most actors now just suck. But I thought Once Upon in Hollywood,
yeah,
he did a really good job.
yeah. Well, for me, his most memorable role will always be Tyler Durden, of course. But I know that he's grown and matured since then. But
Well,
that's like my move. That's my one
he's
of
a
my
better
favorite.
actor in his 50s than he was in his 20s
Yeah,
by a long shot.
definitely. All right, Otto, it's good to talk.
Right.
And you still have your pole position show,
This is
or
pole position.
okay, very good.
What did you think you were speaking on?
Oh, that's what we've been. That's what this. That's
You've been on pole position for an hour and 15 minutes now.
I didn't know if you were making an exception, to talk to me, or if this is like part of your ongoing
Well, it's
show.
not ongoing anymore because my work schedule is
Right.
very irregular, and I almost always work at nights now. So unless I have the whole day off, I really can't schedule a show, and I don't know which days I have off until a week in advance.
Right.
So I can't like do a regular, 10 p.m. Eastern Saturday night every night because I'm often working on those Saturdays. But
Right. Understood.
I occasionally will have a show here, particularly if it's a holiday. So the next one, I don't know if I'll get the day off exactly, but I'm not going to do one for Halloween because that's just so cliched. But I'm going to do one for
Right.
Day of the Dead, which is the big
Oh,
holiday
that's
here.
cool. That's cool.
So I think it's cool, even though it's generally only Mexicans that do it. But we should have a holiday to honor our ancestors.
And that's on November 1st, right? All Souls Day.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. That's
Day of the Dead, Dia de las Muertes.
That's like it's one of my favorite days in the church calendar. I love that. I love all.
And last year I actually almost did die on that day.
You almost died? You said?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Almost had a heart attack due to badly behaving 7th and 8th graders.
Wow. Wow. Okay. That sounds like a story in and of itself.
Well, the whole story of my attempt to teach the youth of America was one
Teach
big
middle school?
giant. I tried to teach middle school. I wasn't very successful.
Wow. And they gave you a heart attack.
I didn't have a heart attack, but I came close. I was having real difficulty breathing. I didn't use the nitroglycerin pills, but I wasn't in good shape. The next day, I had my blood pressure taken, and right, so this is like 24 hours later, and it was off the charts.
Wow. And I'm hoping you quit teaching middle school soon after that.
No, I lasted until the middle of March when I almost happened again, and then they said, we really don't want you to die in the classroom, so here's the deal. We'll pay you all but 1 month's salary if you just resign today.
Okay. Sounds like a pretty good deal.
It was a pretty good deal. My union told me to take it before it disappears.
There you go. Oh, they have unions in New Mexico. I wouldn't.
We do have unions. I am a member of the Commercial Food Workers Union, and for some reason, I still get mail for the National Education Association, which was the union I was as a school teacher.
Well, they're the
kind of union, right? Aren't they the NEA? Well, anyway, hope to talk to you soon. It's been a fascinating conversation.
All right. So we'll talk about 80s music sometime.
Okay. All right.
But
Good luck
I'll
with your
probably,
book.
the next show I'll do will probably be dedicated to Day of the Dead. And I'll
Okay.
probably
Great.
talk about the movie Under the Volcano with Albert Finney.
Based on the book.
Yes, both excellent, but
Yeah.
the movie is on YouTube, so people can
Interesting.
watch it.
Okay. All right, Otto. Good to talk, and talk to you soon.
All right, ciao. All right. Okay, so that was Andy Nowicki, the last standing member of the alt-right. All right, so I'll probably sign off here too as well. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And yes, I have nitroglycerin pills, but I haven't used them at all. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for showing up, and I'll see everybody later. All right. Yeah, we gotta get out of here.